track wouldn't have been possible if it wasn't for the Digitakt II. I had a lot of fun with this track and I am very happy with how it turned out. I'm not just going to do a track breakdown. I'm going to talk about some of the new discoveries that I'm making about sample-based workflows. The samples used in this track mainly come from the AstroLab 37. And if you haven't seen my AstroLab 37 review, I'll leave a link in the description down below. But for now, let's put the headphones on. Let's start with the melodic parts of this track. So this is all of the tracks playing at once. Take out the drums and bass. Actually, let's take out almost everything for now. These are the two primary elements that form the basis of this track. Let's do the ARP first. So this is the ARP. Let me show you the original sample. This is the original sample. Now you might recognize this. Or maybe not, because maybe you didn't watch the AstroLab 37 review, but this is one of the first ARPs that is playing in the background when I'm doing the intro. I just did that as part of just, playing freely and riffing and having fun. But what I did is I basically took I don't know how many bars there is, maybe 4 or 8 bars. And then what's happening here is once it's in the Digitakt, I basically just removed some of the trigs. So I'm basically putting it out as a sliced machine. And you define how many slices you want. In this case, I wanted 64. And then I removed some of them from the trigs. And that's what led to this less repetitive, slightly more melodic ARP. So that's what I did. And the other thing that's happening with this sound is that I am leveraging the system of using the mod wheel macros. And now I'm also actually using the breath control macros. We're going quickly and just have a look at what I'm doing. When I'm opening up the mod wheel macro, I'm just basically opening the filter and I'm reducing some of the overdrive. The reason why I'm reducing the overdrive is just to compensate for the volume increase when the filter opens. So that's just to keep things more level. As I've said in previous videos, I really like to mix inside of the machines as much as possible so that mixing in the DAW is just quicker. It just makes it easier for me also to share my projects on Patreon. So if you want to have a full download of this project and check that out, you can do that from my Patreon. So if we look at the breath control macro, it does other things. It softens the amp attack, and then it adds bit reduction and overdrive and compensates the volume. So it sounds like this. And I'm using this in the peak of the track later on. So I don't know that I pulled it up to the max in the actual performance that I did, but yeah, you can. This is just to add some variety and some difference in texture and some evolution of the sound as this song is progressing. By the way, I should mention that I'm communicating over standard MIDI DIN from the Launch Control XL3 to the Digitakt II. I'm using these WIDI dongles, and they're super, super convenient. CME sent me these over. They picked up on my passionate hate for cables, so I'm lucky to have them now. I can really recommend them for use cases like this. They're ideal for when you have just essentially 2 devices talking to each other. For this one-to-one dual communication, they're great. Let's introduce the other key element of the song, which is this pad. I call it lead. And it's on the lead track. If you've seen my track organization video, you will know that I always put my leads on 5 and 6. I'm using 2 tracks, even though it's just one sample, just because the Digitakt doesn't support polyphony. So in order to have 2-note polyphony, you need to use 2 separate tracks. So I'm just using 2 and alternating between the 2 to make sure that the notes are ringing off and bleeding over each other a little bit. If we go to the original sample, here's how that sounds like. And this should also be maybe familiar. This is the first note. This is the intro path that I played on the AstroLab 37 review. I just basically exported a few bars and put it in as a sample, just so I have some slightly different notes. And then I'm playing those notes in a different way in this track. So here's how I'm playing that. I mean, obviously you need to hear this in context of everything else too. So it's, in this part of the song, it's more of just a background pad. But later on, it evolves into something slightly more interesting. Let's introduce the bass. Here's a technique that I'm super excited about. I'm mainly a synthesis-based musician. I love to make music with synthesizers. And you can tell, I mean, most of these sounds that I've sampled are synths. What's interesting here is the techniques that you can use on the Digitakt to make a sound more like a synth. The way I'm using it in the actual track is more as a stab type of bass. And obviously the way to do that is to have a very aggressive filter envelope. So if I remove the filter envelope, it's a very different sound. So the other thing I'm doing is I have this mod wheel macro that high passes. I'm using the bass width filter to high pass and adding a little bit more delay as well when doing so. So that's a performance effect that I'm using as part of when performing this track. And then I have the breath control, which increases the intensity of the bass. So if I dial this one up, it just becomes a more intense bass. Another thing I should mention, by the way, is I've evolved this setup. So I'm now using the bottom row to have a speedy way of restoring the breath control. So if I dial this up now to 127, I can press here and it goes back to 0. And that's something you'll see in the performance. I'm using that extensively to reset after a build-up and entering the drop. So it's a very convenient way. It's actually, it goes two ways too. So I can hold this in and it will go up to 127 and then back. So I'm using that more for the drums, but it's a very convenient way to just very quickly add some energy and then remove it very quickly as well. So the nice thing about using faders is that you can be very quick. But with these knobs, you have to twist them. So that's where these buttons come in. They can really speed things up. So that's really nice. So here's a cool trick. You can modulate the start point of the sample playback. So you can visually see that it actually starts the sample playback from different points every time it hits. And the way that works is I'm using a LFO. LFO number 2 modulates the start point of the sample. And if I remove this, it just creates a more static sound. This just doesn't sound as interesting anymore. And of course, later in the song, the bass has this chord progression, which is how to make the song more interesting. Let's focus on the pads. It sounds like there's two things going on at the same time. And it's actually, there are 3 tracks. They all have the same sound. The actual sample is, let's see. It's just a synth sound that I, again, grabbed from the AstroLab. AstroLab PWN pad, so pulse width modulation pad something. Leave a comment if you're curious about where I got the samples from. I can probably look that up if I analyze the full file names. Essentially, I'm using 3 tracks, 1, 2, 3. They all have the same general makeup in terms of how they're modulated. There is a ramp LFO that modulates the filter. So that's what makes it feel like, or sound like it's pumping. So if I double the speed, you can hear it doubles this pumping effect. So I'm using that for all 3. The one thing I'm doing differently for each is I'm actually placing this in the stereo field. So I have this one towards the left, I have this other one towards the right, and I have the third one, the brightest note in the middle. So this just creates a wider pad. And that's one of the nice benefits, if you want to call it that, of not having polyphony is because the Digitakt II doesn't have polyphony, I can decide for each note how I want to treat it when I'm playing a chord. I mean, if I'm honest, I would still prefer that they just added the ability to share voices for one track, and maybe they can do that. Please, Electron. So aside from using 3 tracks to get harmony. On track 3, I also use parameter locks to change the attack on some of the notes. So this is the normal sound, and this is how it sounds like on these tracks. And what I'm doing is I'm essentially parameter locking the filter envelope as well as the amp envelope. And I'm doing this just to add some kind of fillers. So it sounds like this. So this is just a clever trick to reuse the same track, because I mean, no one could hear that the actual long note disappeared when those 3 played. And as a result of that, I can still use only 3 tracks for the pad. Let's switch to this one. This is an interesting one for me, because it is another example of something that just happened randomly as a result of using the Digitakt II. If I switch to the original sample, it sounds like this. Which is an ARP that is playing from the AstroLab 37 for another song. Basically, when I started this project, I just grabbed a few samples that I had to see what can I do based on the palette of sounds that I got from the AstroLab 37. What could I cook up inside of the Digitakt II without having it connected? And so I just fed it with a bunch of stuff. In reality, this melody is very different and doesn't make sense for this track, but I basically just took a tiny piece of it and turned that into something that sounds, to me, atonal. It's like it's a bit difficult to hear which note is actually hitting, because it's sort of hitting several notes, because you hear the echo from other notes while hearing the attack of this note. So it's kind of this weird, mysterious thing. I can't really explain it, but I really like it. And then I modulated it so that when I pull this mod wheel up, it changes how it plays. It actually, technically, I think it changes the start point. So yeah, sample start just slightly moves, and then some other stuff with the filter. Listen to it. You need to listen to it in context of the melody. So it's like you've. Yeah, it's just one of those things. I gravitate more and more towards the kind of sitting somewhere in between notes when I make music. I enjoy when things aren't so precise. And this is one of the things that the Digitakt really introduced to me, is I can grab a sample and then just see what happens if I take a tiny piece of that and just put it in the sequencer. And I just let my ears tell me how to program this thing. And yeah, it's just, I just like it very much. On a similar note, we have a 303 loop that I grabbed from the AstroLab 37, which also is an example of the wonders of the Digitakt II. So check this out. That's the original sample. I sampled this, just 1 bar, exactly 1 bar, because when you sample a full 1 bar, it's easier to slice it. So I then threw it into the slicer machine with 16 steps or 16 slices. Excuse me. I think I did a couple of variants of this. So I also have another one that is this one. It's just a lower octave of the same sound. So I wasn't sure which one I wanted to use. I basically just grabbed both. And then I threw this into the slicer machine again. This is like the most awesome feature that I've discovered so far about the Digitakt II, is it has this thing where you just press, once you've sliced a sample, you press yes, and then you can generate random locks. And once you do, it just spits out another melody. It's so cool. So I basically did that a couple of times. And once I was happy with something, I think I removed some of the trigs, and that's how I ended up with this thing. So, I mean, this is gold. When you're producing, when you're creating, composing, you don't always know where to go. And I feel like the Digitakt II is a perfect example of that electron workflow that doesn't just allow you to compose, but it sort of has an opinion. Yeah, sure, I can do that. I can also do this, and check this out. And so it's like you're working with a sparring partner, and it's so wonderful. So, I mean, that's how it sounds like in this pattern. I just tried different things. So this is slightly different on this part of the song. And then obviously, again, using the mod wheel macros. So this is just a high pass. I think it has a high pass. Yeah, it has a high pass filter. So I'm just pulling that up. And I don't think that there's anything else to it. It's just a wonderful workflow. It's just one of those things that helps you compose and helps you generate new ideas. I think this serves a separate tutorial. There's just so much more to talk about this. So I'm just deciding that right now. I'm going to do a tutorial of the random slicer feature, and I'm going to show you some of the other ways you can leverage this in a separate tutorial. So please subscribe if you're interested in that. But let's move on with this track breakdown. Let's go over the drums and start with the background percussion. If you're a subscriber to this channel and you are incredibly attentive to details, you might recognize this rhythm. This is sort of the foundational beat that I'm using on the track called Dune, which is the first track that I did in combination with Launch Control XL. So check that out in the description if you want to listen to that. But yeah, here I'm again just pulling a loop, putting it in the slicer, and randomizing some stuff, and I end up with a completely different rhythm. So here it's more of a background drum loop. And then I'm adding on top of that a kick, which actually is sampled straight from Dune as well. So I'm using, essentially the drums are recycled from Dune. And yeah, it's just fantastic in terms of just being able to whip up a new rhythm so quickly by just grabbing an existing drum loop and putting it in the slicer and then hitting yes and yes and. So now I've just created a new loop. This also sounds cool. It's just introduced the other rhythm. And if I'm not happy with that, I can do it again. Anyway, here's the kick in isolation. It's, yeah, I just sampled this straight from the Digitone into the Digitakt II. The snare is actually, I think it's a stock sound on the Digitakt II, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see. CP Analog 1. Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a stock sound. And I actually think the hi-hat is as well. So HH soft. So these are just stock sounds that I added on top of it. These are the two stock samples. And it's for the drums that I'm leveraging these quick access to the breath control modifiers. So if I'm playing the loop and the snare together and I press this down, it just adds intensity to how things are played back. We check out how that works. Breath control on track 11. And if I dial this up, it adds delay, it softens the attack, it adds bit reduction, and it compensates the volume. So you can twist this up and then twist it down again, but it's faster to just hold this in. And what I'm typically doing in the performance is, as I'm playing the drums, is I'm using also the fill. And then maybe sometimes I high pass to get it with the bass. So yeah, that's just some of the performative things I did to this track. So the rest of this track is really just a bunch of samples and background textures. So let's go through them one by one. So that's a piano thing. I just played it live with the keys on the AstroLab 37 and while having this plugged in. What I usually do is once I have the foundation of a track established, this is kind of the icing on the cake that I do at the final moments of the production. So this is where you add some, you got the Christmas tree, this is when you decorate it. This sample is the piano, and then I did a separate for just one note. So I wanted to clear the reverb. When I built this sequence, I essentially didn't like how they bled into each other. So versus this, and then this one resets and kind of clears the reverb. So it plays like this. And you can hear that it's very high passed. Let's see if I can show that. So this is just parameter locked. This is sort of the background track. I'm just parameter locking specifically what I wanted to hear. This is just another sample that I grabbed. And this is another one. Here I'm using an LFO to modulate the panning. You can hear that it starts from the left and then over to the right. If I turn it off, it would sound more like this. But why would you want to do that? It's basically just a bunch of random samples that add to the background texture and mystery. This is just noise. I always use white noise for texture and for ambience, and I'm modulating the panning and as well as the sweeping. So in this case, if you look at how this is programmed, I think I basically parameter locked that the amp volume is modulated by LFO2, and then LFO3 is modulating the speed of LFO2, as you can see here. So those two in combination creates this feeling like it's almost lifting off. These are freeform, so they actually play differently each time. They're not locked. And then I have the last one. So these samples, I actually don't even know. I don't think that these were from the AstroLab. I think I just grabbed them somewhere, or I don't remember. It sounds like radio noise or something. Or rain. But again, I don't know how I did that. The important part isn't the sample. The important part is how it's baked into the background, drowned in reverb and delay, and some modulations to make it sound like it's alive. And that's how I'm using it in the track. So in full context. And this whole track is meant to be performed. So I'm using these extensively, as you know, in the performance. Stay tuned for the tutorial. I'm actually probably going to do a lot of tutorials on the Digitakt II because I'm discovering samples from a different perspective. And I'm also learning about how to use the Digitakt II as a compositional tool. I think the grid mode and some of the other features really get at the core of what makes this instrument so special. If this was useful, hit the like button and feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. With that said, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.